Hey, quick sit rep on the whole Russia might put hypersonic Oreshnik intermediate range ballistic missiles into Venezuela story. What's real, what's a rumor, and why this probably makes less sense than it sounds. I'm going to use ICD 203 language, which is what the intelligence community uses to evaluate probability. Where I can verify, I will. Where there's rumor, I'll say so, and I'm going to be a little rude to bad strategy. There is a chatter around that Russia will base its new Oreshnik hypersonic missiles in Venezuela. If you've been doom scrolling, you might have seen the whole Cuban Missile Crisis thumbnails and red arrows and mushroom clouds and Miami on fire. Let's breathe for a second here. First off, you're not going to die in a nuclear fireball, so that means you can toss me $5 at ryanbet.substack.com. You can buy my Intel Life t-shirt from Bunker Branding, or one of my two fine novels at Amazon.com, or Audible if you are a Marine. So what's actually being reported here? Politico Europe said in December that Putin announced serial production of the Oreshnik hypersonic ballistic missile and bragged about its speed and supposed inability to be intercepted. It should be noted that the first combat use of the Oreshnik missile was in Ukraine. That part is verifiable, although they didn't even use a warhead for that. I believe they just used ballast. Then the Mahir news agency amplified speculation that Moscow is eyeing Venezuela for Oreshnik deployment. I'm going to emphasize here that this is just speculation. At the same time, the U.S. has surged naval forces into the Southern Caribbean under a still secret directive about using force against designated cartels with destroyers, a marine amphibious unit, and P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol planes headed near Venezuelan waters. That's not a rumor. That's been reported, complete with ship names. Venezuela's reaction is kind of interesting. Maduro claimed that he's mobilizing 4.5 million militia. He vowed to defend the seas, skies, and lands. Even Venezuelans are kind of side-eyeing the number of 4.5 million militia and the idea of a U.S. invasion. I mean, after a decade of breathless regime change rumors that kind of never really materialized, you should know that I've spoken with Venezuelan military officers, and most of their day is spent trying to find food. Last year, when people were claiming Venezuela is about to invade Guyana, I was like, invade? There aren't enough calories in Venezuela for them to invade anyone. And people ask me to make a video about it, and I'm like, why? This is a nothing burger. I'm just hopping on the freaking click train, right? And I don't hop on the click train. You also have Iran's foreign ministry condemning U.S. warmongering toward Venezuela and waiving the UN Charter at Washington. And that's Tehran kind of taking Caracas' side, which is as expected. So all the ingredients are kind of on the table here. So here's a question that matters. Does putting Oreshnik intermediate range missiles in Venezuela change the strategic math? And the short answer to that is no. Russia already has multiple ways to hit the United States with nuclear weapons without moving anything closer. We have intercontinental ballistic missiles like the RS-24, which is silo and road mobile. It's intercontinental range. We have submarine-launched ballistic missiles like the Bori-class submarine with Bulava SLBMs. I think it's 16 missiles per boat with multiple warheads per missile. If your Dacha can already hold Washington at risk, you don't really gain much by lugging a bunch of missiles across an ocean to park it under somebody else's politics, right? This isn't 1962. Back then, yeah, forward-launched intermediate-range ballistic missiles really did shorten the warning time in a world of less reliable intercontinental ballistic missiles, but today, it's like marginal utility for maximum drama. And also, when it comes to Russia, you have to think Axis and allies. You have a finite stock of IPCs per turn, right? And spending them wrong will cause you to lose the war later. Basing hypersonics overseas is expensive in 3 categories. First, the Oreshnik is new, right? Even Putin is only promising near-future serial production. New missiles aren't cheap, and Russia's defense industry is already juggling Ukraine demands, sanctions, and manpower, right? There's a lack of precision machine tools, so you have to decide on where you're actually putting that machine tool for use. Do you use it to build a new tank? Do you use it to build replacement parts for your oil wells? Do you use it to build an Oreshnik missile that'll probably never get launched? And every single Oreshnik forward deployed base is one Oreshnik that's not being used to deter NATO directly or replenish Russia's strategic stockpile. Second thing here, you don't just tow a launcher into the jungle and call it a day. You need roads capable of handling theater ballistic missiles. You need covered shelters. You need hardened comms. You need power. You need fuel spares. You need trained crews, security forces, air defenses, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. You need a local political guarantee that your host won't crack open the door for human intelligence or future government, right? Or future opposition government. And I'm glad I ran out of fingers here. Dude, if I was a Venezuelan and the U.S. offered me a York peppermint patty to open the door and show them around the site, well, shoot, my kids haven't had a York peppermint patty in a long time. I'm just saying, communism and hunger have a way of turning even the most loyal men practical. Well, anyway, let's say you did manage to solve the hunger problem. Let's say it ties down scarce Russian technicians far from main theaters where they're needed. How exactly is that useful, right? You need a lot of those technicians in Russia, and now you're pulling them away to Venezuela. For what? Third thing here, man, I need to finish that patty. Third thing here is opportunity cost. Those IPCs could buy more electronic warfare, more first-person drones, more artillery barrels, more glide kits, more naval repair capacity for Russia's Navy, which is in a dire state. Things Russia are actually burning through in Ukraine today. So are you really going to sink production and diplomatic capital into a prestige missile that you're never going to use, right? Maybe if it was 1962, would have made sense. But if I'm wearing the Kremlin strategy hat here, this is a terrible IPC spend. And you might go like, well, but this is the next Cuban Missile Crisis. And I guarantee you this is what Russian bots are going to start saying online. Look, there was a national interest piece arguing that Trump should remove Maduro to maybe stop a new crisis. That's an op-ed, not intel, but it gives you a flavor of how the hawks are thinking. And I would just note the guy who wrote that article calls himself a panic and an anxiety-producing scholar. I'd rather be an accurate scholar, but you do you, boo. You actually had to type that out on your profile. You know that, right? So, all right, two reality checks here. The 1962 crisis was about restoring credible second strike deterrence and bargaining over strategic deployments. We're talking like Cuba, missiles in Cuba versus those Jupiter missiles in Turkey, right? Today, both sides already have a second strike capability with submarine-launched ballistic missiles. And so forward basing these Oreshniks, it adds risk without really adding any additional capability. Crisis stability actually gets worse when you create exposed high-value targets. A Venezuelan Oreshnik battery would be the first on the list in any escalation. It would force both sides into hair-trigger postures for what? A symbolic photo op? If you're Russia and your goal is deterrence, you keep your strategic toys where they're safest. It's deep in Russia or under the ocean in a bastion in the Barents Sea, not parked under some other unstable regime's flag, right? So what's actually moving in the Caribbean? Why does it matter? The American side isn't really subtle here. That's not Trump's style. The White House signed a still secret directive to use force against cartels, like these Latin American drug cartels that they named terrorists. Shortly afterwards, the DoD began moving Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, the 22nd MEU, forward deployed toward waters in Venezuela. They also have P-8 Poseidons, maritime patrol aircraft, and I think there's a submarine as well. That's some serious power projection for a mission that's supposedly about interdicting drug boats, right? If you really wanted to signal Washington from Venezuela, you wouldn't have to move hypersonics first. You could do it on the cheap in a way that still buys headlines. We're talking about port calls of naval ships. We're talking about sending a couple of bombers over to Venezuela for an exercise, maybe some advisors, radars, electronic warfare detachments, maybe some ISR sharing. Low cost, high PR, right? And then maybe you can get some quiet basing agreements that you can deny later. Maybe you can have contractors do maintenance. It's really like site surveys for extending runways and such. Like all of that is a pain for Southcom, right? But it's orders of magnitude cheaper than standing up a survivable hypersonic complex, and a lot less escalatory than like rolling brand new ballistic missiles into a country with a brittle economy and rolling blackouts and a government that might collapse for want of York peppermint patties, right? So will Russia actually park Oreshniks in Venezuela? So my take, using ICD-203, which is the intelligence community standard for estimating probability, I would call that very unlikely. There's just too much cost and not enough benefit. Will Russia mass produce Oreshniks? I'm going to call that a likely. Putin said that serial production is imminent, but you have to temper that with the fact that Russia's current production capacity is kind of maxed out here. But eventually they will replace their ballistic missiles or intermediate range ballistic missiles. Active consultation with Caracas about some form of military presence. I think that is likely. There is a historic pattern of Russia working with Venezuela. Now, actually forward deploying Oreshnik missiles to Venezuela in the near term, I call that unlikely. It's high cost, it's high vulnerability, it's low strategic payoff, right? Nuclear strategy is actually really freaking simple. If you can hit me at home with intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine launched ballistic missiles, moving the launcher closer, it doesn't make the apocalypse more apocalyptic. Still the same apocalypse, right? So that's kind of why I'm skeptical. Like, this looks like an influence operation and bargaining than an actual serious basing plan. So this looks like a headline war, not a missile war. Again, RyanBeth.substack.com. You want to support the channel. It's $5. Intel Life t-shirt from Bunker Branding. Grab my 2 novels, Wind Machine, Last Republic. Thank you guys so much for watching.
It's me, Captain Bannon of the documentary Team Yankee. When I'm not kicking commie butts, I'm wearing t-shirts from Ryan Macbeth, available at Bunker Branding. Knife hands, HIMARS, landmines, Patriot, and even my favorite, the TOW missile. Mushna, we want t-shirt too. Take a hike, commie. So come on down to Bunker Branding and take a stand for what's really important about America. Capitalism.